Well, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a member of the consultant team working with the City of Charlottesville Department of Neighborhood Development Services on Cville Plans Together. Also with me tonight are LaToya Thomas and Dina Roadside from the consultant team.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here, whether you've already come to several events or this is your first one. We're really glad you're here. We're going to go over some information about the priorities that we heard in our engagement earlier this year, and then go through some of our draft thoughts on how we can begin to adjust the comprehensive plan to reflect those priorities. One thing I want to reiterate before we get started is just please keep in mind that this is the first step in updating the plan, and we're going to discuss more about next steps tonight. But we do really want to get your input on this. You know, we've already had some conversations with folks. We know there's wording to be clarified and other elements to be brought in. So we welcome your comments and questions tonight. You can submit them at any time using the Q&A on Zoom. We will be stopping periodically to ask some polling questions. If you've been on any of our housing webinars, it's a similar format to that. And so we'll stop and have some polls, and we'll also ask, you know, we can have some discussion at each of those points as well. And then we'll have a final Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. So you can submit your questions via the Q&A at any point, and then if you want to ask your question verbally, you can use the raise your hand button, and we will, at the end of the presentation, we'll take you off of mute so you can ask your question. So I think many of you are familiar with Cville Plans Together, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So as a quick reminder, Cville Plans Together is the name of a process, and there's a couple of specific outcomes to this process. One is we are working to revise the city's comprehensive plan. As part of the update to the plan, we've drafted an affordable housing plan, which will feed into that larger comprehensive plan. The goals and strategies will be brought into that. Once the comprehensive plan has been finalized and approved, we'll be rewriting the zoning ordinance to ensure that it not only reflects the goals and strategies outlined in the comprehensive plan, but that it also reflects any other needed updates. If you would like some more background information about the process, you can find that on cvilleplans-together.com, or you can ask your question tonight and we'll have some discussion. Right now we are in the second phase of community input about this process. We're sharing, as I mentioned, some draft materials. This includes not only these initial draft comprehensive plan revisions that we're discussing tonight, but also the draft affordable housing plan. So tonight, the items that we're sharing are these high-level community input-driven priority statements. And we need input on these before we can dig into specific revisions to goals, strategies, sort of implementation plans in that document. And that includes the future land use map. So all of those goals and strategies in the land use map, those are next steps. In that next step, we're also going to be making sure that we're incorporating the draft affordable housing plan, fully into the comprehensive plan as needed. I've mentioned the affordable housing plan. You are certainly welcome to ask any questions about the draft affordable housing plan tonight if you'd like, but I do want to let you know our housing focused team members are not on the call today, so we may not be able to address all of your questions tonight, but one other option would be to come to the office hours that we're holding on Zoom tomorrow night or next Tuesday. So you can find out more information about that on the website. Speaking of the website, we have a webpage available where you can find not only those draft materials I was just mentioning, but also the event schedule. And so you may have already been to this page given that you're here at the event. But if you go here, you can access 3 sections: the engagement summary, the affordable housing plan, and then the comprehensive plan updates. Those are those 3 buttons. I also want to mention, if you scroll down past this information, there's a list of events that are happening. And so that includes not only upcoming events, but also recordings for events like this one. With that being said, I will invite LaToya if she would like to go through an overview of what we heard earlier this year.
Thanks, Jenny. So we actually started our community engagement process earlier in the year, in the spring and summer of 2020, as a way to really start gathering input about goals and priorities for the process going forward. We're particularly concerned about hearing concerns and ideas around equity and housing affordability, along with the many other topics that are part of the comprehensive plan. I'm going to go through some highlights this evening in these slides, but if you check out the website, you can actually see more details regarding the engagement that was done and some of the results of the tools that we used. Next slide. So we use a couple of different mechanisms to get community input, and some of these tools that you see here are actually going to continue to be used going forward over the next several months as well. So as you can see, we had a community-wide survey, which some of you may have participated in, a series of webinars similar to this one, as well as small group discussions. We also have an active toll-free phone number and an email address where we can take email commentary. So you can see the results that we've had from that engagement to date. And again, most of these tools are tools that we'll continue to use going forward. Next slide. So we used a couple of different outreach methods in addition to some of the tools that I showed on the earlier slide. Some of you have been to the Cville Plans Together website. That website will continue to run throughout the course of the project. We've had numerous flyers out sharing different kinds of information, particularly trying to digest some of the more dense information into really concise, easy to read, easy to follow presentations on 1 or 2 pages. We've leveraged social media to try to get the word out about the process, about the ways to engage, as well as other PR opportunities. And again, the phone numbers, the emails, the surveys are all tools that we've used before and we'll continue to use going forward. Next slide. A quick recap of what we heard from the community-wide survey. So we received more than 1,000 survey responses. The survey was conducted both online and we also did hard copy versions of the survey. Again, these are just some highlights. You can check the website for more detailed information. But some of the key information that we want to share this evening, more than half of the surveys came from city residents and about 19% came from Albemarle County residents. This is just important to note because we are encouraging county participation in all aspects of this process as well, just because of the nature of regionalism that this process brings about, and just the fact that you really can't talk about Charlottesville without talking about how the other counties surrounding it impact the life in Charlottesville. We also looked in the survey around issues of race, ethnicity, and housing tenure. So if you're a renter, if you're a homeowner, or even if you didn't have a home. And so that was all information that was valuable for us to learn so we could understand the different perspectives that people were coming to the process from. It's also important to understand that the breakdown of the demographics, as we heard in the survey, does not necessarily match the city's composition. But what the survey did allow us to do is to understand patterns related to how people in different groups might respond to certain questions. Next slide. So I did want to highlight just a couple of really key themes that came out of the survey process. Again, there were a lot of things that came through. These are just the highlights. Housing affordability has been a consistent theme. It was frankly a theme when we started working on this project, and continues to be a theme. Racial equity is a big theme, and it's really one of the underlying frameworks for how we are approaching our work on the comp plan, housing strategy, and zoning code update. Strengthening existing partnerships and coordination with the county, with UVA, with other nonprofits. There's a lot of partners in this region that play a major role in the life of Charlottesville and how Charlottesville moves forward, particularly around issues like urban planning and around housing. So it's really important to think about how those partnerships can be strengthened in this process. And then also, there was interest in seeing less disconnect between topics that were covered in the comprehensive plan. And so for most of you may know, the comp plan covers a wide range of topics like transportation and employment, economic development, housing. And there have been cases where some of those topics are not necessarily linked to the other. And so one of our challenges, I guess, in this process is to make sure that as we're writing the chapters for the comp plan, that we are able to link all of these different chapters together so you can really see the line that ties all of these different issues together to make that bigger fabric that is the life in Charlottesville. Next slide. So just to be clear about how we are using input and how we're going to use it going forward. So the key themes that we've identified are actually part of the draft initial comprehensive plan revisions, and they're part of the draft affordable housing plan. We're obviously still taking input, so we've still got our website up, we still got our email, our phone line, there's a survey open as well. So we want to continue to reference any input that we received to date and use those to develop any newer revised goals and strategies that will ultimately be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. Next slide.
Great. So thanks, LaToya. What we'd like to do is have our first poll, and this is one of, I think, 3. This one's pretty straightforward. We're going to ask which of these May and June engagement activities you engaged in. So we'd like you to select any of them that you took part in. And if you didn't participate in any, again, we're really glad you're here, and we look forward to keeping you engaged. But we'll give you a minute here to respond to this one.
We'll give it another 10 seconds.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So it looks like a handful of you took the survey, some participated in the webinars and the small group discussions. So again, that's good for us to know. We've got, as LaToya said, we're using a lot of these same types of tools now, so we're looking forward to hearing from everyone again. So with that being said, let's jump into the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan, or the comp plan as we might sometimes call it, is a document that describes and illustrates the community's goals, priorities, etc., and it guides decision making in those areas, particularly when it comes to the built environment and the form of the city. So in order for the guidelines in the document to really be legally binding, they generally need to be reflected in the city's zoning ordinance. So an update to the zoning code, as I mentioned, is part of our process to follow after completion of the comprehensive plan update. So once we've defined those community goals and priorities in the plan, we'll make sure that they're reflected in the zoning ordinance as needed. The current comprehensive plan is from 2013. And since Virginia Code requires the Planning Commission to review the plan every 5 years, they began that process in 2017 and 2018. Then they sort of paused, and now we're picking it back up. So we're not starting from scratch on this update, but we're continuing from that initial set of updates to really inject this focus on housing, affordability, and equity, as well as sort of other areas of community interest. And so if you're interested, you can see those draft chapters from 2018 if you go to the website, the documents and materials section, and then related plans. We've got everything on there that is sort of the jumping off point from 2018. So that's the draft chapters as well as the land use map that was developed at that point. But in terms of the updates that we're proposing to the comprehensive plan, let's go through those. So the draft updates that we're proposing for the comprehensive plan are focused on these high-level statements that describe the outcomes that the community is working toward. And so that's in these 2 pieces, the guiding principles and the vision statements. And as I mentioned earlier, this is really the first step in updating the comprehensive plan. Because at this point, we're defining these big picture priorities that will be the basis for future revisions or additions to those goals and actions that are in the plan. in order to work toward those outcomes. So to help illustrate this, I'm using this graphic on the left. And in general, what I'm trying to represent here is that we're defining the future outcome that we want first, as well as guidelines for getting there, and then we'll define the specific actions we want to take. And so I'll bring this graphic back in just a second. But in general, there are, as I mentioned, these two types of big picture priority statements in the plan. So first of all is the guiding principles, and they define these principles that apply to the entire document. With this, we're sort of taking the idea of the community values that were in the 2013 plan and sort of evolving them to be guiding principles for the comprehensive plan. And in the 2013 plan, the community values came from the City Council strategic plan vision. So what we're envisioning in this update is to really hone in on the elements that are important to the comprehensive plan, because the City Council strategic plan applies in many ways to the comprehensive plan, but it's more broad than that as well. We certainly don't envision any conflicts with the City Council's strategic plan, the current one or the one that's coming out of this current update, but we want them to be complementary. As I mentioned, the guiding principles are helping us get to our outcomes. And so one way to think about that is that these are things to keep in mind and guide us as we're sort of building this bridge toward the outcomes we've identified. And those outcomes that we're working toward are the vision statements. And so these vision statements are the second big picture priority sort of statements in the plan. But unlike the guiding principles, which apply to the entire document, the vision statements apply to specifically one topic-specific chapter. And so when I refer to topic-specific chapters, I'm referring to the chapters of the plan, such as transportation, housing, community facilities. You see them here in the boxes, these sort of different themes. And so each vision statement outlines a future vision or outcome for each of these areas that then forms the basis for both the short and longer term goals and actions that we'll be refining in the next step. So again, to bring back this imagery here, to put it another way, again, those vision statements are this outcome we're working toward. So what we're going to be going through today are our initial thoughts about not only these vision statements, but also the guiding principles. But as we've mentioned, we want these to be really community driven. And while we have looked at what we heard in May and June and otherwise from the community, we know you may have some additional thoughts on what you want to see in there. So we look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to dig a bit more into each of these. So let's start with the vision statements. And I'll say we're not going to go through all these line by line. We certainly do welcome your thoughts on specific wording. That'd be best to use, especially when there's a word that may be unclear. But right now what we're trying to sort of go through is the main themes that come out in these vision statements. But one thing that might help would be to look at the chapter structure, because I know several of you may be very familiar with the comprehensive plan, but some of you may not be. So we've sort of created this graphic to show, in general, the structure of one of these topic-specific chapters. So if you think about the transportation chapter, for example, this is what it kind of looks like in the document. So, or I guess let's say in case of the land use chapter, since that's the example we pulled out here. So you can see here, there's at the beginning of the chapter, there's a vision statement. And that again outlines the overall outcome we're working toward for this topic. Underneath that vision statement, there is a series of goals which mention really specific outcomes under that vision statement. And then beneath the goals, there's a series of strategies that help us work toward that goal. So you can see how they all fit together here. And right now we are focused on the orange box, the vision statement. This is the list of the chapters, these topic-specific chapters that we have updated as part of this draft. So you can see these titles are a little different than we were showing in the boxes earlier. And if you're familiar with the 2013 plan, there have been some changes that we've made to these as well. So I'll talk through that as we go through them. I want to note again, we are going through summaries of these today, but if you want to, you can download the slides, and they're shown, the full text is included on the slides at the end, or you can go to the website where you can see the full text. But let's start with community engagement. This is a new chapter for the comprehensive plan. It's something that came up in the last time that the Planning Commission was reviewing the document. We know community engagement is a really important part of the comprehensive plan, but also of a lot of other planning processes. So, as I said, I'm going to sort of read through a summary of each of these, and then I'm happy to speak more about all these in more detail. But for the community engagement and collaboration, the vision statement here says that, recognizing the need for improvements from past efforts, the city will directly seek input, especially from those who are not often heard from and those who may be most impacted by decisions and planning. The city will also facilitate and effectively communicate about opportunities that are transparent, accessible, and respectful. The city will also widely and proactively share information about those opportunities and ensure that residents really understand the process as well as how the outcome could potentially impact their lives. The city will also seek out information sharing partnerships with local organizations. So those bullets kind of talk about how the city will conduct the outreach that it's doing. This last part notes that city-appointed boards, commissions, and committees will be both representative of and sensitive to Charlottesville's diversity and range of perspectives. And that is getting at sort of the community engagement and involvement in the more official processes, these boards, commissions, et cetera, wanting those to be representative of the city of Charlottesville. The second vision statement I want to talk about is what we're calling land use, urban form, and historic preservation. And again, if you're familiar with the comprehensive plan from 2013 or even from 2018, those initial drafts, this is kind of a big change. And what we're proposing here is to combine the land use chapter of the plan with the historic preservation and urban design chapter. And the reason we're proposing that is because there are some very clear connections between those two topics, those three topics, excuse me, land use, sort of urban form and design, and then historic preservation. And so those ties are particularly strong in Charlottesville, and we wanted to bring them more closer together so that we could have some specific goals related to that really tie them together. Excuse me. And so as a summary of this, what we're saying is that through the city's plans, policies, and regulations, the city will strive to eliminate racial and economic inequities, improve housing, enhance livability, improve environmental quality, support efficient transportation, promote infill, and increase commercial vitality. We also noted that the city will be welcoming, human-scaled, sustainable, well-utilized, equitable, and beautiful, and that urban design and historic preservation efforts will both contribute to the character and quality of neighborhoods and the community. We've also noted here that the sort of land use and urban form should really celebrate the full diversity of people and the uniqueness of the different places and neighborhoods in the city, and that communities should look for ways to broaden the range of sort of histories and narratives that are built into the form. And so I want to point out in the last webinar we had on Saturday, we had a good discussion about terms like human scale, terms like commercial vitality, and needing to make sure we're clarifying these as we move forward. So that's something we're taking to heart, and that we are already thinking through how we can adjust some of the phrasing here. I see one question, and we'll wait to answer most questions until we get to certain points, but since I saw it pop up, there's a question about what infill means. And so when we talk about infill, we're talking about development that isn't necessarily coming up in a new neighborhood or outside where the main denser area of the city is. It's looking at places that we can fill in development in either places where there is not development now, but there's development around it, or where there might be places that are currently, what I'll say, underutilized, or they're not being used to the extent that maybe they could be. So it's thinking about those types of elements. But thank you, that pointed out another word that we want to make sure that we clarify. All right, so the vision statement for the housing chapter, which is next up here, is really influenced by the draft affordable housing plan vision, but it also includes additional aspects of housing. And in general, this talks about recognizing the importance of housing for all residents by implementing strategies to achieve a housing market that is affordable, healthy, high quality, and above all, equitable. This also talks about identifying and addressing injustice in the provision of housing options for all, and celebrating and enhancing the variety of available housing types and sizes. And we're talking about both rental and ownership opportunities there. This notes that the city should make clear steps toward addressing affordability, homelessness, and displacement of people from their neighborhoods, and that the city should support culturally and demographically diverse and thriving neighborhoods really throughout the city. Next up is environment, health, and energy. Again, this is a title change. In the previous iteration of this chapter, it was called Urban Environmental Sustainability, but we've incorporated health, energy here to really sort of clarify the full breadth of topics being covered in this chapter. So under this, we're saying that Charlottesville will have healthy air, water, and land, as well as ample and accessible open spaces, and a preserved and enhanced tree canopy. The city will focus on food security and access to healthy food for all residents. And the city will make steady progress toward meeting the already established goal of citywide carbon neutrality by 2050. The city will also look for ways to utilize green infrastructure and encourage healthy and low carbon lifestyles by supporting walking, bicycling, and transit use, as well as access to the outdoors. And that the city will look to mitigate and prepare for the potential impacts of climate change, including increasing reliable access to clean energy sources, updating building standards, and improving environmental quality. When we look at the transportation vision statement, we're talking about enhancing the reliability, safety, efficiency, and equitability of the system, as well as serving vehicles with existing facilities while trying to expand options and connectivity for other travel modes like walking, bicycling, etc. We want to look at affordable and expanded transit coverage, particularly in lower wealth areas, as well as areas that currently lack access. And we want to encourage a multimodal transportation network that is well integrated with land use in order to support access to jobs and other destinations while reducing automobile reliance. And along with that, the provision of parking will be coordinated with urban form goals while mitigating potential impacts to neighborhoods and respecting the needs of residents, businesses, employees, visitors, and others when it comes to the parking needs. We know parking is a hot topic, always it is, and so we want to make sure we're incorporating some statements about the role of parking in this chapter. For economic prosperity and opportunity, this chapter was previously called Economic Sustainability, and this proposed chapter title change really aims to center this chapter on supporting economic development that makes the city stronger and creates opportunities for all residents. So here we've noted that Charlottesville will have a vibrant and resilient economy with a diversified and broadened economic base. The city will be supportive of businesses, including small businesses and minority-owned businesses, and that the city will participate in regional economic initiatives. The city will connect the community with meaningful opportunities for wealth creation. The building of career ladders of opportunity and economic mobility will be bolstered by ensuring that local economic growth is paired with the development of employment, training, and other opportunities for residents. Lastly, the community facilities and services chapter. And so here we're noting that access to outstanding schools, recreational facilities and trails, civic facilities and public buildings, public services, and the infrastructure needed to support a full range of educational and economic opportunities should all be something that the city is thinking about when it comes to community facilities. The city should support the health and welfare of residents, and as well as the quality of the environment in both the city as well as the larger region, recognizing the role the city has in the region. The city should also set a national standard for emergency response and community-oriented public safety with clear strategies aimed at building trust and relationships with all neighborhoods. So that was a very quick overview of those statements. And if you've taken a look at them, you know that there's a lot more text there. There's a lot more depth, but that's sort of a high-level overview. So we would like to ask a poll. And so again, keeping in mind that these are the vision statements focused on these specific chapters, we're asking you to choose which 2 chapters contain the items that you are most passionate or concerned about. And that might be something that you really like what you heard, what we said, or something that you're concerned might not be, addressed enough. We're just looking for the 2 chapters that sort of contain the pieces you're thinking about the most.
We'll keep it open for 10 more seconds.
Great. Let's see. So it looks like land use, urban form, and historic preservation was the top choice. Community engagement and collaboration also coming out on high, which is great, and as well as housing, which is certainly not a surprise. And so we know all of these are important. We're not asking you to choose, which one you think needs the most focus. So we certainly empathize with recognizing it's hard to choose 2, but thank you for that. That's it's always interesting to see the results here. All right, so next, let's dig into the guiding principles a bit again. So again, these guiding principles are things that we want to keep in mind as we're sort of building this bridge, this future toward these topic-specific chapter outcomes that we just talked about. And so we are proposing 5 guiding principles. And as with the vision statements, we are very open to thinking about being careful about the wording we're using with these, as well as whether we're missing anything. So we do want to know what you think of these. As with the vision statements, you can find full text for those at the end of the presentation if you're looking for that, or you can find it on the website. So I'll note, I'll pull up the guiding principles here in a second. These are not listed in any particular order. I just want to make sure that's clear. But first up, we have equity and opportunity. And the short version of this is that all people should be able to thrive in Charlottesville. If you look online, you can see there's a slightly longer statement along with that. The second guiding principle is local and regional collaboration. And this notes that from the neighborhood to the region, having open conversations and partnerships will make the city stronger. The third is environmental stewardship and sustainability. And this notes that the Charlottesville community should demonstrate environmental and climate leadership. The fourth is connections and access, which notes that the city should consider land use and transportation in complementary ways in order to create better and safer mobility options for all. And lastly, but very importantly, community culture and unity. And this notes that Charlottesville's rich and diverse culture should be celebrated, and that the entire community should create an environment in which all of the city's residents feel welcomed, valued, and respected. So these are the 5 guiding principles that we are putting out. And again, these are those statements that can apply throughout the plan. As LaToya mentioned, one of the things we heard in our earlier engagement process was that people wanted to see how things are connected. They don't want to just see a transportation chapter and a land use chapter and then no talking between them. So the way we're planning to use these guiding principles is to say, when we're looking at different goals under these different chapters, we can show how they're connected through guiding principles. So for example, if we're looking at something like connections and access, there's clear ties there between the transportation chapter and the economic prosperity and opportunity chapter, giving people access to jobs via different modes of transportation. That's just one example. Hopefully you can see different ways that those might, that these guiding principles can feed into all these vision statements. That's something that we'll continue to be looking to especially address, especially as we move forward to that next step of identifying goals and strategies. And the idea is that we'll be showing explicitly in the plan how these are all connected. And so that was a quick overview. I'm gonna leave this slide up while we do the poll, but we're gonna pull up our third poll here and ask you to once again choose what you think are most important in terms of your personal self here. So we're going to ask you, which two guiding principles do you think have the most need to be addressed throughout the plan? Which of these do you think apply most in all of these topics? Again, I know it's hard to choose two, but I'm interested in seeing these results coming in here. We'll give you a few more seconds.
Close it down in 5 seconds.
Great. So equity and opportunity came out on top, which is great. As we've been talking about, equity is really one of our biggest focuses in this, we're carrying on this update. But there's overlap between a lot of these different guiding principles, and that's fine, and that's a good thing. They should speak to each other. So equity obviously feeds in with all of these as well. So thank you all of you for that. Oops. So before we close down here and go to any questions, I just want to show our schedule and talk about what's next. So this shows our current schedule, which we updated in mid-October. You can find this on the front page of our website if you want to look closer. I want to say up front, this is an ambitious schedule, and it will depend on how this phase of community review of the draft housing, affordable housing plan, as well as the comprehensive plan revisions, how this goes. But for right now, we're in this stage of community review through December 2nd. We do have a check-in planned with the Planning Commission for December 8th. And with them, we'll be discussing the schedule, as well as potential next steps for land use and the rest of the comprehensive plan. One other thing I want to point out here is that with the draft affordable housing plan, we are seeking council endorsement for that, hopefully early in 2021, and after we make revisions based on this community input phase. And the reason we want to take that piece of the plan to council before the full comprehensive plan is because the rest of the plan can be really influenced by it. Things, land use, potential land use changes, and others throughout the plan. There's a lot in that draft affordable housing plan that can be making some big changes. So we just want to have that discussion with the council, and we'll make sure to announce when that happens. One other thing to note is that this schedule assumes a next public engagement period around early February, and our current plan, subject to change, is to include a draft land use map and revisions to goals and strategies at that point. So we'll look forward to having you involved then as well. So we want to know what you think about all these materials that we're putting out, and you can obviously share any thoughts tonight, but I want to reiterate all the opportunities that are available. So you can find all of the materials on the page linked here, which we're calling our virtual meeting page. We'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar, as I mentioned, so you might want to pull that up to have another listen. Excuse me. If you go to this website, you can walk through the materials either by downloading a PDF, if you want to print it and then look at it offline, give your eyes a little rest. But you can also pull it up right on the site. And the nice thing about that is that you can use the translate feature. So if you know anyone who might want to use the translate feature, or they might be more comfortable reading in another language, please let them know that that's available. But that being said, we would love to have you. Obviously, we're happy you're here tonight. If you have other questions, I mentioned that there is virtual drop-in office hours you might want to come to. We will have folks from the housing team available at these, so if you have housing questions, that would be a great time to come. There is a survey open on the website through December 2nd. It's available in English and Spanish. And we do have a toll-free phone line available. And if someone calls that, they can listen either in English or Spanish to a short message, and then either leave their comments as a voicemail, or they can leave us their phone number, and request that we give them a call to have a little chat. We're happy to do that. A couple other things I want to note here that aren't shown. We are trying to find ways to come out in the community and put out flyers and speak with people. So you might see us out and about. We are also working with a set of peer engagers who are Charlottesville residents who are helping us to distribute information. So you might see them as well. One last thing to note in terms of events is that we have a steering committee meeting on Monday, and anyone can join. You can see the registration link on the website on the Stay Involved page. Before we go to Q&A, I just want to say one final request to please help us share this information. There's a lot of information available on the website, but we've also got some out on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So we really hope we can get as many people involved in this as possible. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. Excuse me. I see we have a couple of questions here, so I will dive into those. I think we may also have a, let's see, or if you would like to ask a question out loud, you can raise your hand and we will bring you off of mute at this point as well. But to dive into some questions, let's see, there was a question about, I'm just gonna answer this one quickly, the steering committee meeting. There's a question about whether that's been moved to 11/24. And the answer to that is we originally had an office hours, those virtual office hours scheduled for November 23rd, but then we ended up scheduling the steering committee meeting for that day instead. So that was the office hours that were switched to 11/24. My apologies for any confusion on that. Let's see, there is a question about the guiding principles, and it says, shouldn't there be a guiding principle that recognizes the interests and needs of businesses in order to ensure economic vitality, prosperity, and opportunity? So let me just bring up the guiding principles here. Oops. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just reading the question one more time to make sure I catch it. Let's see here. Yeah, I think, so again, the question is, with the guiding principles, should there be a guiding principle that recognizes the interests and needs of businesses in order to ensure economic vitality, prosperity, and opportunity? I think that's something that can be considered. But again, what we're trying to do with these guiding principles is have some sort of cross-cutting guiding principles, right? So if we're talking about recognizing the interests and needs of businesses. If you're sort of specifically focused on businesses, that might fit best under those vision statements in the economic prosperity and opportunity chapter. But to me, the way that this might fall into the existing guiding principles would be opportunity, giving opportunities for, some small businesses, minority-owned businesses, those that might not have, where they maybe lack support now. It would be looking at that equity and opportunity guiding principle to get them some more support. Things like connections and access, making sure that people can be located at transit, along transit locations in order to access jobs, that type of thing. But Dina, any other thoughts on that, whether we might want to consider a guiding principle that recognizes the interests and needs of businesses?
Well, I think that it's something that we definitely will consider. The purpose of having these meetings is to hear these ideas and to receive this feedback, because what you're seeing tonight is definitely not locked in place. And this is the kind of feedback that we're asking for. And so we will take this forward and hear what suggestions are as we present this in the next several weeks.
Yep. So thank you for that. Let's see here. There's a question about whether any of us on the consulting team are Charlottesville residents, and we are not. We are based in DC. Several of us, not all of us, but that's sort of the majority of the team. But we have been working in several of us in Charlottesville for many years, and so we're familiar with the city. But the reason that we have really focused on a lot of community engagement in this process is because we really want to make sure that we're hearing from people who live in the city. So I mentioned our peer engagers. They're sort of an extension of us right now. They're helping us get out into the community. But to answer your question again directly, no, none of the members of the consulting team are Charlottesville residents.
But we're not only in DC. Roadside and Harwell is actually in Alexandria,
Yes,
Virginia.
sorry. The DC metro area.
It's called COVID,
Yes. But thank you for that. Let's see, there's a question about outreach, and wondering if we can explain a little bit about the efforts made for those in housing. And so we have, and I'm assuming you mean public housing, but if that's not the case, let me know. So we have been working to, with some of our steering committee members and others, to distribute flyers, send emails where that's a feasible option for folks. We've also got, again, like we mentioned, the peer engagers out. They're sort of going door to door, neighborhood to neighborhood to share information. We are also, working this week to get out some door hangers in certain neighborhoods, getting those printed up. And we're trying to focus on people that we did not hear from a lot in the first round of engagement. So that would include, in many ways, a lot of public housing residents. We did hear from some, but we would love to hear from more. I will note that in the first round of engagement, we did have some partners working with us distributing, for example, printed surveys. And so in this round of engagement, the survey is really just one way that we're getting input from people. So we're really focusing on a flyer and getting out information about the plan at a high level. So that was a bit of a roundabout response to your question. If you have any other thoughts, LaToya or Dina, please feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we did mention that specifically, again, assuming this is for public housing, but kind of regardless, we did do a mailing, I believe, of the flyer in partnership with, was it CRHA?
Yes, yeah.
Where we included information about the process and how folks could actually get connected to the phone number, to the survey, to all of the ways that we were sharing information. We did a mailer earlier in the summer when we were actually launching a lot of the public engagement processes. And then, as Jenny mentioned, one of our now current peer engagers was a woman who actually we connected with prior to us starting the peer engagement, and she did a lot of direct resident-to-resident outreach to get information from residents, to get them to complete the survey and to share flyers.
That all being said, if you have thoughts about other ways we can be reaching folks, we'd be happy to have those ideas now or later. So thank you for that question. I'm just going to respond to this new question that came in. There's a question about who the peer engagers are and where we can find their names. LaToya, I maybe would ask you as well, but we haven't told them. We'll be announcing them publicly yet and sharing their names. So I want to make sure they're comfortable with that first. But then I think it's a great idea to share that information and help people know who they are, because we're glad they're on board. So I'm going to say right now, I'm not wanting to share their names, but we'll try to get clearance for that and then get their names on the website or out in another way. Let's see, there's yes, one more follow-up to that. Asked if the peer engagers are being paid, and yes, they are being paid, which we are very excited about. Let's see, there's a question about, is there data to show the emergency response time for certain areas? And I assume that has looking at sort of the community services and facilities chapter. We, at this point, have not looked specifically at that data. I think it likely exists. I do not have access to that right now, but we can follow up afterward and see if we can find that for you. But that could be something that comes out in the next couple of months as we're looking at specific goals and sort of actions that need to be taken in these different areas. I think something like emergency response time in different neighborhoods is a really important thing to look at. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's see, there's a question, a question about the steering committee, noting that a majority of steering committee members are UVA or associated with UVA. Excuse me. And there's a question of whether we have analyzed that membership impact or influence. And I will say we haven't. In Charlottesville, there are a lot of people who are connected with UVA in various ways. Either by, they attended school or they work at this university or whatnot, and that's sort of the nature of a town like Charlottesville. So we have not done an analysis in terms of who is associated with UVA in any way on the steering committee. We do have one direct representative of UVA on the steering committee. That's Alice Rauscher, who's the university architect. I would say no is the answer to your question. We certainly recognize that UVA is a big part of the city of Charlottesville. So it's not in the city, but it's right there, and we recognize the influence on the city. And so, when we've asked on our surveys, for example, we've asked if people are current or sort of recent students. We sort of changed that question this time to ask if survey respondents are, current or recent students, or if they work at the university or whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see on this new survey what those results look like. But that again is not directly related to the steering committee, to respond to your question. Let's see, there's a question about, have we met directly with any neighborhood associations? And we have not yet. We have reached out directly to neighborhood associations. LaToya has been emailing folks, making sure they know, how the flyer, help us to share that with people in the communities. We do recognize there are a lot of neighborhood associations, and we do want them to be involved, people who are leaders in those associations as well as others. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to reach out to folks. And I think it's quite possible that, especially once we get to the zoning rewrite, for example, there might be communities where we're maybe proposing some more significant changes. And that's just, we don't have any that we're proposing now, but I'm just saying as a hypothetical. In that case, we may want to be meeting with neighborhood associations directly. That would make a lot of sense. So it's, we have been in communication, but have not yet met directly with them.
But there is a representative from the body that represents all of the neighborhood associations on the steering committee.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Let's see, I'll give it a bit of time here for any other additional questions. I don't see any hands raised. Oh, here's one. Let's see here. Okay, so there's a question related to housing, and I'm gonna read it. As I mentioned, we don't have our housing team members here today, so we might want to have them respond to this. But let's read this. So the question is, or comment: housing costs are increasing for everyone at all price points. Increasing tax valuations make both rental and owner-occupied housing more expensive. So how will that be addressed? At this point, the comment continues, at this point, the plan and housing study appear to be more about increasing inventory overall than increasing affordability. This notes that that'll make both entry-level homeownership and aging in place more expensive. Let's see here. She, followed up to note that when you look at the survey results from that first survey, there were a lot of people who lived here more than 10 years. Many of them probably own or rent housing with increased tax burdens, but the value of their properties exceeds the city caps on house value for tax reductions. So thank you for that. So the main point being brought out here is that, how are we addressing increased tax valuations that make it more expensive for both renters and homeowners, as well as other elements that make things more expensive rather than just looking at supply. And so I'm a little cautious about responding to this without HRNA here, who's our housing team member, but they do have in the plan, in the draft affordable housing plan, strategies looking at those subsidies that exist now. As you've noted, there may be cases where the property value exceeds the sort of limit to receive those subsidies. That's not something I am well versed in at this point. But I will note that they have looked at ways to make not only just increase inventory, but to address those affordability needs. And I would encourage you, and I'm sorry I can't respond more clearly to that at this point, but I'd encourage you to come, if you can, to the office hours, the virtual meeting that we're having tomorrow or on Tuesday, to ask them that directly.
Well, in addition, I would recommend that you review the draft housing plan, because there are many, many, many recommendations in that plan that don't just talk about increasing inventory overall or increasing supply as a solution, but there is a recognition that there are many strategies that will need to be put in place in order to make this an effective housing plan and housing strategy for the city. And they've suggested a wide range of different tools to be applied in Charlottesville. And it's worth looking at that draft plan and providing comments to that plan.
And it's a big plan, so even if you've looked at it, it might not be super clear. So feel free to send us more. We can help to point that out, or find out what we might need to change on that. We're happy to get your thoughts if that is missing in there. So thank you for that comment. Let's see, Latoya, are there any hands raised?
Not right now.
Okay. Well, I'll do one final reminder of the website. So this would be the time to ask any final questions if you have them. We have this draft, this virtual meeting page. If you go here, you can not only get linked to the engagement summary from May and June, that's the orange button. The green button is the draft affordable housing plan page. And then the blue button is the comprehensive plan page. And so those are where you can click to view the draft materials we were talking about tonight. If you scroll to the bottom of that page, you can see the webinar recordings as well as other upcoming events. And you can also find the link to the survey is down a little bit lower on this page. So we really encourage you all to let us know what you think of all this. Even if you submitted a question tonight, you want to submit it again, or if you want some more clarification, please do feel free to let us know, and we're happy to speak with you more. But at that point, if there are no further questions, and it looks like there's not, I will just say one more time, thank you so much for coming out and spending some time with us this evening. And we hope we see you some more, either at this phase or at the next stage. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.